The wind rustled through the pines as our old pickup truck rolled down the narrow dirt road, leading to Grandpa's newly inherited cabin in Pine Ridge Estates. I was riding shotgun, windows down, letting the mountain air cut through the tension in my chest. Grandpa had his usual calm face on, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting on the doorframe. His silver hair shone under the sun, his shoulders straight like always. But I could feel something brewing beneath that quiet strength. We hadn't even moved in yet, and trouble was already waiting. The problem had a name: Karen Atwood, HOA President, Queen of Fake Smiles and Unnecessary Rules. She had already sent 3 letters in the span of 1 week. All properties must comply with HOA standards. Failure to attend the orientation will result in penalties. This cabin is under mandatory HOA review. Grandpa never answered any of them. This your land now? I had asked when he signed the final paperwork. He had looked me dead in the eye. Son, I built half this country's fences. I've earned a few acres of quiet, but quiet was exactly what Karen wouldn't allow. We parked the truck near the front porch. The cabin looked exactly like I remembered from childhood visits' weathered logs. Rocking chairs on the deck, and the old federal flag folded in a glass case by the door. Grandpa stood there for a moment, taking it in. I could almost hear the memories racing through his mind. And then, just as we began unloading the boxes, a black Mercedes SUV skidded to a stop on the gravel road. Out stepped a woman in her 50s. Platinum bob, pearls gleaming in the daylight. She held a clipboard like it was a weapon. Behind her trailed a wiry man in slacks and a younger blonde woman, both with HOA badges hanging from their lanyards like they were state officials. "You can't park here without HOA authorization," she said, pointing at Grandpa's truck. "I'm not parked," Grandpa replied without even looking at her. "I live here." Her nostrils flared like a bloodhound, catching the wrong scent. "You are currently in violation of 6 community codes. Your siding is outdated. There is no decorative mailbox, and there is a clear lack of landscaping compliance." Grandpa stepped off the porch slowly, each footfall firm. "This cabin was built before your HOA existed. It doesn't apply to me." Karen's jaw tightened. "Oh, you'll find we apply to everyone, mister." Grandpa didn't answer. He picked up a box of books and walked past her as if she didn't exist. She turned redder than her HOA armband. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, we were sitting on the porch sipping iced tea when flashing red and blue lights lit up the driveway. 2 sheriff's deputies stepped out of the vehicle. One of them looked barely older than me. The other looked like he'd been working road patrol since Vietnam. Karen marched out from behind their cruiser, her heels crunching the gravel like gunfire. "I told you he was trespassing," she said, confidently, and refusing to follow HOA law. The older deputy pulled out a small notepad and stepped forward. "Sir, we received a call about noncompliance. Are you the resident?" Before Grandpa could answer, Karen interrupted. "He's belligerent and has already broken several rules. I want him fined and removed. He clearly doesn't understand Pine Ridge policies." Grandpa stood up, calm as always, and reached into the small satchel he kept near the porch swing. For a brief second, the younger officer's hand twitched toward his holster until Grandpa slowly pulled out a leather wallet. He opened it and held it forward. Inside was a federal badge, polished and unmistakable. The older deputy squinted at it, then snapped to attention. "Sir, Captain James Holden." Karen blinked. "Excuse me? What?" The younger deputy saluted instinctively. "Sir, it's an honor." Karen looked between the 3 of them, her voice shaking. "Wait, Captain. Captain of what?" Grandpa stepped closer. "Federal land acquisitions, retired, but still certified. And this cabin is legally exempt from any HOA regulations, as per Federal Property Transfer Code, Section 42. It was the first time I saw Karen speechless. Her clipboard trembled in her hand. She looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under her soul. You can't be serious.
But this isn't
fair, she gasped. Grandpa didn't even smile. Life rarely is. The deputies exchanged a look. The older one nodded at Grandpa. You're clear, sir. She files another false complaint, we'll file a report on our end. And just like that, the cops left, not with Grandpa, but with Karen, still sputtering behind them. I looked at him as we sat back down. You didn't tell me you were a federal captain. He took a slow sip of tea and stared at the sunset. Didn't think it mattered. He said, but sometimes people need reminding. That night, I realized this wouldn't just be a story about settling into a cabin. This was going to be a war of wills, and Grandpa was just getting started. The next morning, Pine Ridge Estates felt different. Word had spread. We hadn't even finished unpacking, and already Grandpa's quiet resistance had gone local. At the diner in town, whispers trailed us from booth to booth. A waitress leaned in and whispered, "Is it true he flashed a federal badge right in Karen Atwood's face?" Her eyes gleamed with both fear and admiration. I just smiled and nodded. Double quotes, yup, didn't even spill his tea. But we both knew this was far from over. HOA Karen wasn't the kind of woman who bowed out after being humiliated in public. No humiliation only made her more dangerous. And, just like clockwork, her claws came out 2 days later in the form of a letter from the HOA's legal department taped to our front door. Notice of urgent review compliance hearing scheduled. They were trying to pull him into a kangaroo court, a hearing that had no real legal bearing, but one meant to humiliate and pressure new residents into submission. They wanted to strip Grandpa of his dignity publicly. But they didn't realize he'd been through worse. I watched him read the letter. Without flinching, then he folded it neatly and placed it under his coffee mug. "She's escalating," I said. "She's grasping," he corrected. That night, as we sat by the fireplace, Grandpa finally told me the full story. He had served 35 years in federal land acquisitions, managing conflicts between private citizens and public land expansions. He'd dealt with mayors, contractors, and armed ranchers. He'd negotiated deals under fire, both literal and political, and the cabin. It wasn't just a family heirloom. It was part of a classified land transfer from decades ago land his department had helped secure for strategic access, then passed on to him upon retirement in recognition of his service. "This land," he said, tapping the cabin floor with his boot, "is more protected than the White House lawn." The day of the HOA's so-called hearing, we didn't dress up. Grandpa wore his old plaid shirt, sleeves rolled up like he was heading to clean the garage, not face a panel of angry suburban tyrants. I followed, notebook in hand, just to observe. The community center was packed. Karen sat at the center of the long table like a self-appointed queen. Flanked by 2 board members, she had a smug look like someone about to serve a public execution. "Mr. Holden," she began, "we've gathered today to address your failure to meet the compliance expectations of Pine Ridge Estates." But Grandpa didn't let her finish. "I'm not a member of your HOA," he said. Calm. Clear Karen's smirk didn't fade. "That's what we're here to determine." One of the board members, a wiry man with glasses, added, as per section 5C of our charter, "Any resident within the community boundary is automatically subject." Grandpa interrupted again. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a sealed federal file, stamped with a classification number and dated decades ago. He opened it and laid it flat on the table. The audience leaned forward. Karen's eyes twitched. "This," he said, "is a copy of the federal exemption deed that applies to this property. Section 42 of the Land Allocation Act of 1971, which overrides all local civilian contracts. including HOS. Karen's jaw dropped. One of the board members whispered something, his face suddenly pale. It also states, Grandpa continued, that anyone attempting to forcibly impose regulations on this parcel without federal clearance may be subject to investigation under misuse of authority statutes. Karen's pearl necklace suddenly looked like it was strangling her. But this isn't legal. Grandpa raised a brow. It's been signed by 3 senators. You're welcome. To take it to court? Silence. No one dared breathe. I watched as neighbors in the audience glanced at each other. Some clearly amused, others uncomfortable, but more than a few looked relieved. They'd been under Karen's thumb for years, and now someone had stood up to her and won. She banged her gavel way too hard. This hearing is adjourned. And just like that, she stormed out, her board scrambling after her. We walked out slowly. Grandpa didn't say a word. He didn't have to. People moved out of the way. Some nodded at him. Some whispered, "Thank you." That night, back at the cabin, we made chili and sat on the porch while coyotes howled in the distance. Why do you think she's like that? I asked. Grandpa stirred his bowl slowly. Some people are so used to controlling everything, they mistake compliance for respect. And you? I don't need anyone to fear me. Just to leave me be. The stars were out. The wind was softer. That night, it was the first time in days the land felt quiet again. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't done. No tyrant lets go without a final swing. And Grandpa, whether he liked it or not, had just become the symbol of everything she couldn't control. The days that followed the hearing felt oddly peaceful. Karen had disappeared. Literally, her black SUV still prowled the neighborhood every morning at 7 a.m. sharp. And her perfectly watered flower beds were still aggressively symmetrical. But her energy had changed. Where there once was venom, there was quiet calculation. She wasn't done. She was regrouping. Grandpa didn't speak of it much. He returned to working on the cabin, fixing the old shed, repainting the shutters, chopping wood like he was building a fortress. But I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't over. The neighbors, though, had started noticing. People who hadn't said a word to us when we arrived were now nodding when they passed. One even dropped off a pie. "She's been barking at all of us for years," the man said, tipping his cap. "Told us your granddad shut her up real good at that meeting. Wish I'd seen it." Grandpa gave him a polite nod and handed him some firewood in return. But just as things started to settle, it happened. I woke up to the sound of chainsaws. It was 6:45 in the morning. I stumbled out of bed and flung open the front door to a surreal sight. 2 men in neon vests, cutting through Grandpa's front fence. They were loading the wooden panels onto a flatbed truck like they were garbage. Grandpa was already outside. Fully dressed, voice calm but edged with steel. "Put those boards back," he said to the crew. The taller of the 2 men looked apologetic. "Sir, we were given orders by the HOA. Said this fence was in violation." Grandpa stepped closer. "That fence was built in 1984. It's grandfathered in, just like I am." The second worker, younger and more anxious, nudged his partner. "We should call Karen. This guy's serious." That was when she pulled up. Karen, in a full navy pantsuit, stepped out like she was walking into a courtroom. She didn't acknowledge Grandpa, just walked straight to the workers. "Continue," she barked. He was warned. The HOA gave him 3 weeks to comply. "You gave me nothing," Grandpa said. Stepping in front of her, Karen sneered. "This isn't about you. This is about preserving community standards. You can't just waltz in here with some dusty badge and pretend. The rules don't apply." That's when Grandpa did something I hadn't seen him do before. He raised his voice. "If you touch one more piece of my property," he said, "I'll make one phone call and the next people you see won't be local law enforcement." Karen's face twisted. "Oh, you're threatening me now?" Grandpa didn't answer. He pulled out his phone and, without hesitation, dialed. She scoffed. "Who are you calling? The FBI?" He didn't answer her. "Hello." "Yes," he said calmly. "I need to report unauthorized civilian contractors tampering with protected land. Pine Ridge Sector, Federal Exemption Zone." "Yes. I have documents." "Yes. Thank you." He hung up. Karen looked stunned. "You actually called someone?" Grandpa looked at the workers. "You boys should pack up and go." They didn't need convincing. Within 10 minutes, the fence was back in place, the tools packed up, and the truck was rolling back up the road. Karen stood there, fists clenched, breathing hard. "This isn't over," she hissed. "It should be," Grandpa said. "For your sake." She stormed off. Later that day, an unmarked black SUV with tinted windows arrived. 2 plainclothes agents stepped out. One of them carried a leather folder. They spoke with Grandpa for half an hour on the porch, quietly. Professionally, Karen watched from across the street, pacing like a tiger behind glass. When they left, Grandpa finally sat down with me. "I was hoping not to bring those boys into this," he said. "But she forced my hand. You think this will stop her?" "No," he replied. "I think it'll corner her. And cornered people are dangerous." That night, I found a letter taped to our mailbox. No return address. It read, "We don't want her either. But she's gotten worse since you arrived. Be careful. She's not alone." It was unsigned. My stomach turned. This wasn't just a petty HOA war anymore. Karen had people, or at least power, backing her up. And now, my grandfather, a man who had spent his life protecting the quiet integrity of his service, was once again being pulled into a battle he never asked for. But what she didn't realize was that I was done being a bystander she wanted. A war. She just inherited one. 3 nights after the fence incident, the winds howled through Pine Ridge like ghosts refusing to rest. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin felt like a warning. Karen hadn't made another move. Not officially, but the silence was loud. Too loud. Like the calm before the next ugly storm. Grandpa was out on the porch, whittling wood like he always did when his mind was heavy. He carved slow, methodical. Like every curl of cedar helped him think clearer. I sat beside him, the silence between us stretching, warm and familiar. "Why won't she just leave us alone?" I finally asked. "She doesn't know how," he said. "Some people only feel important when they're in control, and when they lose it, they panic. That panic makes them dangerous." I nodded. "And what about you? You're calm even when she sends goons to rip down your fence." He smiled faintly. "Calm isn't the opposite of fear, son. It's what you hold on to when fear comes knocking." The next morning, we found tire tracks leading straight up to the side of our cabin, deep grooves in the earth, circling behind the shed. Someone had been on our land in the night. But what really chilled me was what they left behind. A box wrapped in brown paper, sitting neatly by the back door. Grandpa opened it without a word. Inside was a small, burned American flag, charred at the corners. Stuffed beneath it, a photocopy of his old federal ID torn across the middle. Beneath that, a note scribbled in thick black marker. "You're not untouchable." I stared at the message, my throat dry. "This is serious," I said. This isn't HOA business anymore. This is personal." Grandpa nodded. "It always was. We called the sheriff. They came, took photos, filed a report." But their tone was careful, distant, like they were walking on eggshells. One of the deputies even mumbled something about Karen having friends at the county office. That night, I couldn't sit still. "She's trying to intimidate you," I said. You should go public. Let people know. You can't keep absorbing this quietly." Grandpa looked at me, not stern, but steady. Going public isn't always protection. Sometimes it just makes you a bigger target. I didn't sleep at all. Instead, I did something I hadn't done since college. I stayed up all night digging. Karen Atwood. Pine Ridge Estates. Board meeting minutes. County records. HOA budget allocations. I even traced her name through old real estate databases, and there it was. A payment, $38,000. Moved from HOA funds to a company called Ridgeline Solutions, a supposed landscaping contractor. But Ridgeline had no website, no license in the state, and shared an address with a law firm, the same firm that had drafted the compliance hearing letter. I printed everything. The paper stack was thick, damning the next morning. I gave it to Grandpa. He read every page slowly, eyes narrowing. "She's funneling HOA money to personal legal support," I said. "It's embezzlement, maybe fraud. She's been using residence fees to go after anyone who challenges her." Grandpa tapped the last page, his voice low. "This changes things." We took the file to a lawyer in town, a veteran himself. He knew the weight of federal protections and local corruption. After reviewing it, he looked up and said one word: lawsuit. Not just any lawsuit. Federal interference, targeted harassment, and misuse of public HOA funds. The kind of suit that could bring a board down and expose everything Karen had done for years. "You have enough here to start a fire," the lawyer said. "The kind that doesn't burn wood. It burns reputations." Still, Grandpa hesitated. "I don't want to drag the whole community through this." I couldn't believe him. "She burned your flag," I said. "She's trespassing, threatening. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about everyone she's bullied. You think she stops with you? She'll just find another target." His jaw tightened. He stood slowly, walked to the window, and stared out at the trees. "She made it personal the moment she came for this land," he finally said. "She'll learn what that really means." And just like that, the fire-lit Grandpa agreed to proceed, not out of revenge, but out of principle. We filed the lawsuit that week. When Karen got served, it was poetic. She was in the middle of leading a community flowerbed inspection, clipboard in hand, when a courier handed her the documents. Her face drained of color as she flipped through the page's photos. Financial records, her own signature printed bold and undeniable. I watched from the truck, heart thumping, as she turned, made eye contact with me, and for the first time, looked afraid that night. The wind returned, but it didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt like change, like the storm was finally moving through, and for the first time since arriving at Pine Ridge. I believed we might win. The lawsuit set off a chain reaction we couldn't have predicted or controlled. Karen Atwood had ruled Pine Ridge Estates for nearly a decade. Her HOA board was filled with people who owed her favors, feared her disapproval, or simply enjoyed the power that came from standing in her shadow. But once the legal papers dropped, once real accountability entered the conversation, cracks began to form. At first, it was whispers, a few board members stepping back from public events, a notice canceling the monthly HOA barbecue. Then came the resignations, quite sudden, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Meanwhile, Grandpa and I tried to keep life at the cabin as normal as possible, chopping wood, fixing the fence, making chili on weekends. But there was no denying the shift. He wasn't just a quiet old veteran anymore. He was a symbol now of resistance, of justice, of someone who had finally stood up to the power-hungry woman who ruled this neighborhood like her personal kingdom. And Karen. She was unraveling. She didn't hold community meetings anymore. Instead, she patrolled the neighborhood like a dictator guarding the last walls of her empire. Her smile was gone, replaced by tight lips and darting eyes. Her pearls seemed to hang heavier. Her heels clicked louder. Even her beloved flower beds had started to wilt. But we weren't naive. We knew her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And then she struck. One crisp morning, I woke up to the sound of dogs barking, not ours. I looked out the window and saw 3 animal control trucks parked at the edge of our driveway. "Sir, we've received a report of illegal animals being kept on this property," one of them told Grandpa. "Illegal?" Grandpa blinked. "We have a cat, and he barely counts." They searched anyway, tipped over feed bins, dug through our shed, took pictures of everything. And when they left with nothing, they looked confused. "I'm sorry, sir," one said quietly. "We were told this was a serious violation." Grandpa just nodded. "Next time, maybe ask for proof before bringing 3 trucks." 2 days later, a noise complaint. Then a waste disposal citation. Then an anonymous tip accusing Grandpa of using the land for commercial purposes without a license, all bogus, all easily disproved. But the message was clear. Karen was using every lever she had left. Weaponizing bureaucracy, trying to bleed us dry, wear us out. Not in court, in paperwork. "She wants us exhausted," I told Grandpa. "She's scared," he said simply. Cornered animals always lash out. Still, even he looked tired. That night, as we sat around the fireplace, I noticed something different in him. Not fear, not regret, but pain, not physical. Emotional. He stared into the flames and spoke without looking at me. "I served 35 years trying to keep systems." "Honest," he said. "Believed in institutions. Believed in structure. And then I retire, and a woman like her uses rules like knives. Makes a mockery of everything I spent my life defending." I swallowed hard. "You're still defending it? You're still fighting?" "Back," he nodded. "But sometimes I wonder, what if she never breaks? What if people like her always find a way to rise again?" I leaned forward, voice steady. "Then we teach others how to stand. That's the point. You're not just fighting her anymore. You're showing everyone else they don't have to stay small." The fire popped softly between us. He gave a faint smile. "You've grown up," he said. "You've been teaching me." I answered. The next week was quiet. Too quiet, we continued prepping for court. Our lawyer was confident. The financial paper trail was solid. The embezzlement claim had legs. Even the local paper had reached out for an anonymous quote. But that silence from Karen's side. It wasn't surrender. It was the eye of the storm. And it hit on a Sunday. We were returning from the farmer's market when we found the front porch trashed. Flower pots smashed. Porch swing ripped from its chain. The federal flag display shattered. On the ground, and spray painted across the cabin wall in dripping red paint, were 4 words. "This isn't your land." I froze. My fists clenched. Grandpa, though, stood still. For a long time. Just staring. Then, wordlessly, he picked up the broken glass from the display. One shard at a time. Slowly, carefully, reverently, we called the police. They took photos. Promised to look into it. But the same distant tone returned. And this time, the younger officer had trouble meeting Grandpa's eyes. "She's not just running the HOA. Huh?" whispered after they left. "She's got people everywhere, doesn't she?" Grandpa didn't answer. Instead, he did something different. He went inside. Changed into his formal uniform, the one from his retirement ceremony, and stepped back out onto the porch. He stood beneath the defaced wall, chest out, metals catching the light, and had me take a photo. "I want people to see this," he said. "I want them to see what bullies do when rules don't stop them." We posted it online, not on our personal pages, but anonymously on a local forum. Within 48 hours, it had 10,000 views. And the comments? They were on fire. People shared their own HOA horror stories. Others demanded Karen resign. One claimed she had been strong-armed out of her home by Karen's code enforcers. A few offered legal help. Some just offered support, and that's when the dam broke. Karen wasn't the only one with power anymore. Now, we had a voice by the time the town paper picked up the story. The photo had gone viral across every community Facebook group and HOA watchdog blog in the state. There stood Grandpa, proud, uniformed, and dignified beneath a wall that had been defaced, not with childish graffiti, but with a threat against everything he had built, everything he stood for. Its posture didn't scream victim. It declared, "I'm still here." The headline read, "Veterans Home Vandalized in HOA. Feud, Town Divided Over Long Reigning President," and just like that, the narrative shifted. Karen Atwood, once the untouchable queen of Pine Ridge, was suddenly being scrutinized by people outside her tiny kingdom. The court date was now a spectacle. Reporters parked at the edges of the neighborhood. Residents who once avoided eye contact with us now offered soft thank yous. Some even handed Grandpa handwritten letters thanking him for standing up. But none of it erased the tension. Every night, Grandpa checked the locks twice, every morning. We scanned the porch before stepping outside, and even though Karen hadn't shown her face since the vandalism, her shadow lingered. That tight grip of control she'd once had over the neighborhood, it was slipping, and she knew it. The week before the hearing, something unexpected happened. A man knocked on our door. He was older, wiry, in a flannel shirt and jeans. His voice was gravel, but respectful. He introduced himself as Richard Wells, former vice president of the HOA, Karen's right-hand man for years. "I've come to talk," he said. Grandpa eyed him cautiously. "You've got a lot of nerve." "I know," Richard said. "That's why I'm here." We invited him in. He didn't waste time. "I helped her build this machine," he said, 10 years ago. "I thought we were doing good. Order, clean yards, community. But somewhere along the line, it turned into something else. She started weaponizing the rules. Then she stopped listening altogether." "Why now?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. "'Cause I saw the photo, and it shamed me. I knew what we were becoming. But that made it real." He slid a small flash drive across the table. "Meeting recordings," he said. "Private ones." She recorded everything, even things she shouldn't have. I kept backups. "If your lawyer wants fuel, this is it." Grandpa looked him square in the eye. "Why should I trust you?" "Because if I was like her," Richard said quietly, "I wouldn't have come through the front door." That night, we listened to the recordings. What we heard confirmed everything, and then some. Karen admitting to falsifying complaints, directing board members to make life difficult for dissenters, laughing about threatening to foreclose on elderly neighbors who missed a fee. She even referenced Grandpa by name, calling him a washed-up relic with no teeth left. Looked at Grandpa, expecting anger, but he just shook his head. "She doesn't realize," he murmured. "Some of us never needed to bite. We just had to stand." The court hearing arrived on a gray, drizzling Tuesday morning. Pine Ridge's tiny courthouse was packed. Locals, journalists, even former HOA board members came. On one side of the aisle sat Karen, dressed in all white, lips pursed like stone. Her lawyer whispered furiously beside her. On the other side, us, Grandpa in his formal blazer, me beside him, and our lawyer, briefcase in hand, ready for war. The judge was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and no patience for drama. Our lawyer began with the evidence, the fake fines, the trespassing, the weaponization of the HOA charter. He presented photos, Karen's own letters, and finally, the recordings. When her voice echoed through the courtroom, smug, manipulative, ruthless, even her lawyer closed his eyes. Karen paled, But the killing blow came from the financial. Records how Ridgeline Solutions wasn't real, how HOA funds had been funneled into personal legal defenses, how she had authorized payments to Shell companies tied back to her cousin in another county. Fraud, misuse of funds, harassment. Grandpa didn't speak much. Just one statement. "I moved here to live in peace," he said to the judge. "But peace requires justice, and justice needs courage. I've done my part. I just ask the court to do yours." Karen's side tried to claim technicalities, unclear exemptions, ambiguous bylaws, but the judge wasn't buying it. By noon, it was over. The ruling: Karen Atwood was removed from her position as HOA President, permanently barred from future community leadership, and referred to county prosecutors for investigation into financial misconduct. The courtroom erupted. Karen stood there, frozen, the very image of a woman who'd never been told no in her life. Now being told enough, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just gathered her designer purse, turned slowly, and walked out, heels silent this time. Afterward, a small crowd gathered around Grandpa outside the courthouse. A young couple shook his hand. A retired woman hugged him. An older man wiped away tears and simply said, "You reminded us who we used to be." That night, back at the cabin, we finally let the fire burn long. Grandpa poured 2 cups of tea. He looked at the stars. "She'll move away," he said. "She'll try to rebuild somewhere, and us." I asked. "We don't move," he said softly. "We heal." The wind carried the scent of pine and burnt wood as the last traces of autumn slipped away, and the cabin once again felt like home. But this time, it felt different. Not because Karen was gone. Not because the lawsuits were behind us, or because the walls had been repainted and the porch swing rehung. It felt different because we'd reclaimed something deeper: our dignity, our peace, and the soul of this land. The morning after the ruling, Grandpa stepped outside like he always did, mug in hand, boots on gravel. But when he paused at the edge of the porch, I saw it for the first time in months. He exhaled fully. Not a tense, tight breath, but a genuine, bone-deep sigh of relief. He was letting go, and so was I. The messages kept coming for weeks. Letters in the mailbox, notes left under rocks. One neighbor brought over a casserole and said through teary eyes, "I was scared of her for 6 years. Thank you for not being." Another brought a folded American flag, his father's, and placed it in Grandpa's hands. "We forgot what that meant," he said. "You reminded us." Grandpa didn't say much. He never did. But when the town invited him to speak at the annual Veterans Day gathering a week later, he said yes. I stood beside him on the small podium set up in the park. It wasn't a huge crowd, just folks from Pine Ridge and a few neighboring communities. Kids held little flags. Old men wore faded caps, and Karen's old allies. Nowhere in sight. Grandpa spoke slowly, clearly, like each word was carved from the wood he used to whittle. "I didn't come here to fight," he began. "I came here to remember who I was when I wasn't in uniform." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "But sometimes," he continued, "life asks you to wear a different kind of uniform. Not with medals, but with memories. Not with stripes, but with scars. Because standing up doesn't always mean running into danger. Sometimes it means refusing to back down when someone tries to take what doesn't belong to them." The crowd stood in silence, some nodding, some wiping away tears. And to the people still afraid, he added, "Let me say this. Bullies build empires on silence. Break the silence, and the whole thing crumbles." They gave him a standing ovation, but he didn't stay long. He never liked applause. Weeks turned to months. Winter came softly that year. Snow blanketed Pine Ridge in white, like the land itself had been wiped clean. The lawsuit settlements funded repairs around the neighborhood. The HOA was placed under temporary oversight by an outside firm, Karen Atwood. She quietly sold her home and disappeared into some coastal town where no one knew her name or her past. She never apologized. She never would. But that didn't matter, because justice wasn't about forcing someone to be sorry. It was about making things right. One quiet evening in January, Grandpa handed me a set of keys. "They're yours now," he said, placing them in my palm. The land, the cabin, the mess of it, all of it. I blinked. "What?" "No, I'm not leaving," he chuckled. "I'm just trusting. It's time you started building your own chapters here." I looked around. The porch light flickered warmly. The wind rustled the trees. A deer moved quietly. At the edge of the woods, and in the distance, the old gravel path where Karen once stormed up in heels now lay untouched, silent, and free. Spring came early. We rebuilt the fence together, stronger and taller. Replanted flower beds with wild native blooms. Installed a new flagpole this time, 10 feet taller, and raised both the American flag and a simple wooden sign beneath it. The sign read, "Peace is earned. Stand for it." And people noticed. The cabin became more than just a home. It became a story, a reminder. Local high schoolers came to interview Grandpa for a civics project. A journalist featured our story in a piece titled "The Man Who Quietly Changed Everything." HOA reform advocates cited his lawsuit across the state. But Grandpa, he just kept making tea, chopping wood, and sitting on the porch with the cat curled at his feet one day. I asked him if he missed anything. He shook his head. "Nothing but my knees." I laughed, seriously. He looked out toward the hills and said, "I miss being invisible. But I suppose when you do something worth remembering, that's the price." And maybe he was right. Maybe we don't choose when our quiet lives are shattered by loud people. Maybe we don't plan to become symbols or examples or sparks for something bigger. But sometimes life hands us a line in the sand. And when it does, when someone tries to erase it, you don't just stand on your side. You dig your heels in, and you make sure the line stays visible for the next person. Karen's house was sold to a young family with twin toddlers and a golden retriever. They painted over her beige walls with pastel blue. They built a tiny wooden library box on the curb and left out seed packets for neighbors. One afternoon, the dad came over holding a rake. "You the guy who stood up to the HOA queen?" he asked. Grandpa smirked. "That's me." The man grinned. "Heard you're a legend." Grandpa took the rake and said, "Nah, just an old man who got tired of bullies."